So I'm initiating the recording for class number 3 for Walking with Hanshan, in which we're going to focus on section 2, the early edition poems. So I've named this third class Cold Mountain Practices Zen. These are the most Buddhist poems. So in that spirit, we'll sit just for a couple of moments and see if others join us. As we continue to sit for just maybe another minute, I'd recommend a practice which is just gently open your eyes, looking at the screen, not to look at any one person particularly, but just let the fullness of these small images of people register. That you're sitting with so many people, and so many people are sitting with you, beyond the ones that are represented in these small thumbnails on the screen. That we're sitting actually for all beings, and all beings are with us. In a traditional Zendo, we'd face a blank wall. But we know that this is the reality. And then as I invite the bell to end this brief sitting, enjoy seeing everyone bow to you. Kim, I guess you and Glenn could move a little closer since it looks like you're the guys. And you can see on the screen how you line up. So it just makes it a little more intimate. That's great. It's good to see you. And I want to say, just for the recording, how much I appreciate seeing all of you, and how much I appreciate those of you that I can't see, who will be watching at other times. So that those of you who are going to watch this later, who can't be with us tonight or in a time zone where it's difficult to be with us right now, can feel welcomed. And everyone here welcomes those people now with another bow, just because it's appropriate to do so when people come into the room. And others will be coming into this room later and virtually. So as I mentioned at the outset, I did want to walk through the second section in the book, the poems from the 7th and 8th centuries, which, like I said, I call Coal Mountain Practices Zen. Tanahashi spoke about how these were the most Zen or Buddhist poems of the group. But first, I wanted, for my own homework, I wrote a little note, one of my own reflections, really, as we walk along. There's an illusion in this walk. And the illusion is that I'm leading. And, in some ways, I guess there's some truth to that. But when you take a hike together or a walk, especially with a number of people like this, different people come to the front and different people fall back because they're looking at something, or they're taking a photograph, or you're in a conversation with a buddy, and then you catch up with everyone else. But I'm walking with you. And at this midpoint in the class, I'm sure you've had a number of experiences of reading the poems themselves, of course, and so many of you have commented on this. I got a wonderful message from Glenn earlier about how much they'd meant to him, and I'm going to quote a little bit from that later. You've probably read some of the offerings, like Cassie had mentioned earlier, which are quite wonderful. The class meetings and the videos and the prompts for homework, they're all important, but I don't know about you, but in the middle of the sequence, I'm finding the questions that arise, which also arise for me in the beginning of any retreat, which is something like, now, why am I doing this? Or is this worth my time and effort? Did those things arise for you any time? Even if you're enjoying it, or even if you're getting something out of it. I think if you're not asking these questions, you're probably not paying attention, They naturally come up. Things often sound really good in the beginning, and they sound like a great idea until you plunge in. And you can see, of the nearly 40 people who signed up, we have a smaller group of that tonight, because the reality of the time and the study and the practice can begin to feel like obstacles, if not burdens. And these things can be amplified a little bit by what's triggered or brought forward by the practices themselves. But these are ordinary dharma gates that arise in any kind of practice. But without taking care to reflect honestly on your experience, and without a relatively clear mirror of a trusted teacher or your good spiritual friends, it's hard to tell if these questions are wise discernment or reactivity. Because they get pretty close, aren't they, sometimes? And I think probably it's a good idea to, all of it's true in some measure, so it's important to have all these parts have a place at the table, or maybe I should say we should have a cushion for all of them, so we can sit with all of these parts. So if you've plunged in, and by this time you've climbed enough of Coal Mountain, that we ask the most fundamental question, which is, what is practice anyway? And this is the question I think that Hanshan is asking and responding to and reflecting on in this second series of poems. Let's look at number 146, which begins the section, I believe. You who read my poems, protect the purity of your heart. As I started this section, those first two lines were kind of enough. You who read my poems, protect the purity of your heart. Be more modest with your grasping and greed. Then what is crooked will straighten out, driving away unwholesome deeds. Just take refuge in your true nature, and you will attain a Buddha body today, like a fast-running demon. I love that fast-running demon thing. Did you look in the notes? It said a fast-running demon is the demon serving the god of lightning and thunder, but it usually refers to the law or order. And I love that, Law and Order. It's like a TV show. So here, Hanshan starts right off with a thumbnail of all of Zen practice in this one poem. And he suggests that we protect the purity of our heart. And before you jump to thinking, okay, now how do you do this? There's one thing to make sure that you notice. He does not say that practices purify you. It says it protects something. It doesn't say it will purify your heart. It says it will protect it. Protect the purity of your heart. So as we sit Zazen, which is of course our foundation, and we take up the study of the precepts as our first entry into really dedicated Zen practice. Most of you have done that. You take up the precepts in the beginning. He writes, the more, let's see, how does he say it here? Be more modest with your grasping and greed. Then what is crooked will straighten out, driving away unwholesome deeds. I think that's really quite a nice description of the practice of the precepts, or the path of the precepts. It's actually, I think, a better way to say it. And then he follows with an invitation to take refuge in our true nature, which is none other than a Buddha body today. So I loved this way that he starts in right away describing Zen practice. Practice Zazen, observe the precepts, continuously take refuge, and realize your own heart and mind as the embodiment of the Buddha. That's a pretty good description of all the practice, right? Sit Zazen, observe the precepts, continuously take refuge, and realize your own heart and mind as the embodiment of the Buddha. In our chant of the Bodhisattva vow, we say, Buddha's way is unsurpassable. This vow embodies it. I embody it. We embody it. Stephen Batchelor, in his essay on the word appamada, and I think probably a lot of you read this, haven't you? You've seen this little essay? It's entitled "The Buddha's Last Word, Care," and I'll give you the link so you can read it. But if you go to the Appamada website, it's on the Appamada website. And there's a quote from the Anguttara Nikaya Sutra, and this is the classical translation. It says, "Monks, I know of no other single thing of such power to cause the arising of wholesome states, if not yet risen, or to cause the waning of unwholesome states, if not already arisen, as Appamada." And then he continues, and I'm going to quote this at length a little bit. I'm going to read a whole paragraph from Stephen Batchelor's article. It's the kind of thing that you've heard Peg and I talk about, but we were first inspired by reading this talk. He gave the talk in 2004. It showed up in the publication from the Buddhist Berry Center for Buddhist Studies in September of 2005 in their Insight Journal. And ever since we read it, I said, I think it's the name we should use for our center because it represents the qualities that we stand for. And of course, I'm going to give you the notes on the Google Doc, so you'll have all this. I'm going to post all of this for you, so you'll have them. But he says, Appamada is not just the occasional mindful thought or attentive state of mind. It's actually a commitment to being attentive. It's more than just a meditative state of mind. It's more than just being mindful. It has to do with that primary ethical or moral orientation we have in life, with which we bring into being whatever activity we're engaged in. So it's a primary orientation that's ethical and practical. Whether in formal meditation, in our interactions with other people, in our social concerns, or in our political choices, it's the energetic cherishing of what we regard as good. So I'll pause just for a second. We think about this in formal meditation, and probably quite a bit with other people. But in our social concerns, in our political choices, it's very relevant. Do we energetically cherish what we regard as good? So Appamada, he says, is a word for care, but it's more than that somehow. It's very difficult to find the right word in English, he said. Appamada is that intention which guides us and directs us and inspires us, that energizes us, that commits us to what is we consider to be good. We can summarize that as wisdom, compassion, or tolerance, all the virtues Buddhism encourages. But remember that Appamada is the frame that encloses them all. Appamada is the frame that encloses them all. In other words, Appamada is perhaps best thought of as not a state of mind, but more a perspective, an orientation, or a sensibility. And I'm quoting this partly because it has to do with that key thing in the first poem about protecting the purification of the mind and heart. It's a commitment to what we honor as good, and at the same time, it guards the mind against what gives rise to affliction. And here's the definition that's specifically in alignment with what Hanshan is writing about. It guards the mind, it protects the mind against what gives rise to affliction. There's something protective about this commitment to what is good, Batchelor says, guarding us against those impulses and drives and habits of mind that seek to subvert and overwhelm and distract us from the goal. All in all, I think it's the most suitable last word of the Buddha. So I don't know if Hanshan had ever read the Appamada Sutra or these teachings in which the word was used, but I thought that first poem, which was a synthesis of or summary of all of Buddhist practice, and at its core talks about this protective quality, not a purification, a protective quality that our practice leads us to. Does this make sense in terms of this first poem? Any comments or questions or anything? Please stop me because you know I'll go on and on. If you have any questions or anything, just unmute yourself so I don't see a mouth going like this. And I'll be happy to answer your questions. One of the issues that, do you want to say something, Ann?
I can wait. I'll ask him.
No, please. I just didn't notice that you had mentioned, so go ahead.
I just wondered if you could speak a little more to taking refuge in your true nature, in the true nature part of that.
I think that it's another way of saying something that you and I had actually had a discussion about, which is most of us, whether we admit it or think of it this way, take refuge. And by that, I mean, we have confidence in and we turn toward and lean on our everyday thoughts and feelings and our habits. That's what we follow all the time. But there are moments in which those things soften and we open to something more fundamental. And that which we open to is described, for example, in the paramitas. Our true nature, when conditioning softens, comes forward as generosity, as ethical conduct, as patience, as energy and commitment through meditation and wisdom. These aren't necessarily things that are separate from us that we strive for. There are qualities that are expressive of our true nature, and we can return to those through practice. The second one is ethical conduct, so the precepts open a way of living with ourselves and others. So taking refuge in our true nature means coming back to that which is most true. Unfortunately, and this is why I gave you the homework I did last time about what if there's nothing wrong with me? Most of us think our truest self is like our most broken parts. Because we do that all the time. Well, if people really knew who I was, then they would, and then you have your list of the ways they would be horrified, right? But actually, that's completely the opposite direction. If people really knew who you were, they would bow down to you. Because then they would see your Buddha nature, your true nature. And that's what he's saying to take refuge in. So am I speaking to what you and questioning? Okay, great. Anything else about that? Cassie, you unmuted, so I didn't know.
I did. So with one of the things that came up was if I took away everything, that was wrong with me, would I really be eliminating all of my most human qualities?
Well, actually, the question wasn't, would you eliminate everything wrong with you? The question was, what if you didn't operate with the perspective that there was something wrong with you?
Oh, I guess that's, yeah.
And so therefore, all of my limitations, all of my difficulties, all of my struggles, all of my mistakes would be included, not excluded. I just wouldn't think there was something wrong with me. Because now everything's included. And I'm so glad you asked, because that's a crucial discernment. One of the questions that we've been asking ourselves at Appamada, and maybe you have in Madison and other places, is how to, number one, invite younger people, and how to deal with, the gray hair of our Sangha. Not talking about Nancy and Kathy or Judith, everybody. So, young people, and when we were young, those of us that are older, you commit yourself to personal development and achievement because that's what you should do. That's the developmental task. But over time, with practice and maturity, you find that it's not quite enough. And I'll say, this is a little bit of a humorous remark, but in monasteries and temples, you need those young people with energy because they take care of everything. and make sure things happen. But let's look at 155. And I'm going to, like I will on some of these others, I'm going to play around with gender. You can see what it says. We should admire the strong young woman whose figure inspires real awe. Not even 30 springs and autumns have passed, yet she's talented in 100 different arts. Wearing a golden breastplate, she competes with other warriors, then gathers friends together for a feast. There's only one thing lacking. She does not transmit the inexhaustible lamp. Of course, reading it as a strong young man, part of me, even though I'm not young anymore, I thought, oh Lord, how much of my life I've been driven by those energies of accomplishment and achievement. And there was a time in which I had done so much of what I wanted to do, and I felt so anxious and so unhappy. And it was the time I turned to practice. It drove me to practice because I didn't know what else to do. And realized that transmitting the inexhaustible lamp was actually what I wanted to commit my life to. And that no matter how much I competed and how much I achieved, I wouldn't actually understand how to take refuge in the way that Anne was asking about, or see myself from that larger perspective that Cassie was asking about. Now, actually the poem right before, number 154, older people who have practiced some determination and steadfastness over time come to a deeper appreciation of this importance and find themselves, we find ourselves sitting on that vulnerable edge of impermanence. I think that's what Kathy's doing right now, right? With your friend. Would you unmute yourself just for a second? Do you mind saying what you're doing?
I'm caring for my sister-in-law, who I love dearly, who is doing really well, recovering from acute leukemia, and in the meantime has a fractured pelvis, some real pain in her ribs, and is now, we're working through a bout of some severe diarrhea. It's been hard. I hope that's not too much detail, but I mean, it captures what life as it is can be like.
Right. Each of us.
And the other piece that's important is her husband had to leave because his 95-year-old father has just been started with hospice.
So he's gone to take care of his 95-year-old.
Right.
But you're there to take care of her.
Right. And we're learning together. We're learning how to do that together and appreciating each other. Yeah,
that's right.
Good.
And your buddy, who at least on my screen is right next to you, Nancy, of course, is very fresh in her grief over loss of her precious Michael. And everybody has these. So let's look at 154. And you want to read it, Nancy? You have to unmute yourself there. Yeah. There you go.
I was trying to unmute Cassie.
Oh.
She's down on my screen there. I've sat steadily on Cold Mountain, absorbed just here for 30 years. Yesterday I went to visit close companions, though most are already in the underground spring. Gradually their lives burned out like candles. They drifted off like water in a stream. This morning I faced my solitary shadow. Before I knew it, 2 threads of tears came streaming down.
Is that a good one for you?
It is.
Yeah.
And later I would like to read another one that has to do with my 16-year-old grandson and me.
Oh, good. And I want to have you read the four girls
Uh-huh.
And I have it. It's going to be part of the teaching later, so I'll return to you on that one too.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting that in number 154, he talks about, I've sat steadily absorbed here for 30 years. And at 155, he said, we should admire the strong young person whose figure inspires real awe, even 30 springs and autumns. In other words, 30-year-old. But in 154, of course, we hear him appreciating what it's like to have good friends for a long time, although not all of them are still around.
Right.
And how it's natural that we would grieve those losses. And it's as a side note, maybe I'll remember to send it to you. Hold on. Some of you are familiar with the beautiful poem by Stanley Kuna. It's called The Layers, which speaks to this. I'll add it to the Google box so you can see that. Well, in this spirit, I wanted to add a little something that some of you might have read, a contribution by one of our students. She said, as I was reading the poems and revisiting some of them, she went back to number 69, you don't have to go to right now, but she read, a wretched, hungry, and frozen man, clearly born different from animals or fish. So she's reflecting on that line. She said, as I was contemplating these first two lines, I also returned to Norman Fisher in his new book, The World Could Be Otherwise, opening to page 118 to find this line. Being human is a rare gift. Most of the creatures on our planet have not received this gift. And I was so deeply touched, she says. The poem continues, I lived a long time beneath a polished tombstone. Sometimes he'd weep on the street corner after dreaming for days about hot cooked rice. But he got through winter without even a jacket, carrying his bundle of thatch and 5 scoops of bran. And in reflection, she writes, I was so touched because whatever the state of the man, and he happens to be a man, is a rare gift, whatever the state, which is kind of what we were touching on a moment ago, Cassie. It helped me reflect on my own life and any gripes that I have. I have the gift of being born as a human being. I've received this gift. How can I learn to reduce my material wealth and get through challenges? How long have I been living beneath a polished tombstone? How often have I wept on the street corner? And when I could have gone what I've got through without much, just a deep inner connection to warmth and love, I feel quite tearful. So just like Hanshan was left with a few tears streaming down, with this appreciation of what it's like just to be human, this student is speaking about the same thing as they walk with Hanshan. Maizumi Roshi, who was the founding teacher at the Los Angeles Zen Center, used to speak about the most essential understanding of Zen practice would be just to deeply appreciate your life. And I think this is some of what Hanshan and what this student is reflecting on. Of course, there's the longings we live with, which jerk us around, and attachments and enchantments that seem to guide us. But I want to return to this taking refuge that Anne was also touching on. Let's look at number 228. And with an apology to Hanshan, I'm going to mess with the gender again, just because I think it's useful. Number 228. Long ago, someone traveled the great ocean determined to get a wish-granting jewel. As soon as she reached the inner chamber of the Dragon Palace, she cut through the golden barrier chain, which alarmed the Dragon Queen, though she was safe inside. The warrior swung her sword and searched the stars, but she couldn't find the jewel. Having done what she could, she returned and entered the gate, where she realized the bright jewel was her original mind. And that word that was translated as mind is probably Sheen, which is probably heart mind, original heart, original mind. Long ago, someone traveling the great ocean, sometimes in the early Zen poems, they'll talk about the great ocean of birth and death. In other words, this immense expanse that's incredibly deep, which is really just our life, the great ocean of birth and death. Someone traveling the great ocean, well, that's us, determined to get a wish-granting jewel, determined to find the way, determined to wake up, determined to find some peace for our heart. And as soon as she reached the inner chamber, there are all these images of a dragon protecting this place. And she broke the golden chain. She woke up the dragon and swung her sword, but she couldn't find the jewel. It's supposed to be in there, It's supposed to be somewhere else. It's supposed to be locked away. But when she returned and entered the gate, I'm going to pause there for a second. There's this gorgeous line, which some of you are familiar with, in Joan Sutherland's commentary on the Vimalakirti Sutra, where she talks about the gate of awakening isn't something in front of you. It's behind you, and all you have to do is step back through it. And I think it's one of the most beautiful images of this kind of refuge. Having done what she could, in other words, having carried forward with great gusto, she returned and entered the gate. She stepped back, where she realized the bright jewel was her original mind with her all along. It's a very powerful one for me. Now, another student, and this is Nancy, offered a poem of this return to one's true nature through embracing everything. It's something that we all have to learn. Do you have the four of her meeting in the clearing with you, Nancy? You have to unmute.
I think I can go get it.
Well, I don't mind reading it if you want to hear it read to you.
Yeah, right. Read it to me.
Okay, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
And I'll give you like the spoiler a little bit. The four of her meet in a clearing is the name of the poem. And I'm going to give you the names of the four just so they ring to you. There's the invisible girl, the drudge, the timekeeper, and the hippie chick. These are the four, just so they'll click as we go along. And there's a way in which she's done the poem where they're speaking, so I'll have to just enact it a little bit. The invisible girl steps out of the shadows and into the clearing. The shape of her being slowly coming into focus for the others gathered there. Becoming slightly more visible, she looks around and gains a voice. Gazing at the drudge, bent down and somber, she asked, "Why have you worked so hard for so many years while ignoring the possibility of joy?" The drudge looks up from her thankless task. "I've always feared not being enough, thinking only tireless work could make me worthy. Joy, I never considered." The gaze of the invisible girl then falls on the timekeeper, who then speaks, only now looking up from her watch. "Managing and measuring my life by meeting deadlines, keeping time, no time to waste, too little time to spend. I wonder now who is keeping score. In turn, the fourth of those gathered there, the hippie chick, offers her confession. For decades, I wandered wordlessly, wanting peace, seeking justice, searching for a better world, while too often forgetting to smile. Only now, seeing love wasted on the way, then believing I found myself alone. Looking at the invisible girl, the hippie chick queries, are you ready to begin to dismantle those unseen walls you built to become invisible so many years ago? I'm going to read that again. Are you ready to begin to dismantle those unseen walls you built to become invisible so many years ago? I hope so, answers the invisible girl. The hippie chick smiles, holds out her hands. Then perhaps we can walk together out of this tiny clearing and on to the sun-dappled path. The one here, before us all. Now manifest, dropping fear, laying down wasted love, no longer keeping score. They begin to walk side by side, holding hands. The four become one whole heart, beating together. That lovely?
You read it very well. You read it better than I did. Good.
How was it to have it read back to you?
It was wonderful to have it read back to me. Yeah.
Well, I hope you can feel the meaning that it moves through me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's your poem.
Right.
But then and that's what happens when we walk together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens when we walk with Hanshan.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to read your other one?
My vows?
Or no, the other poem you said you wanted to read, or is there a place?
Oh, the one from the book. Yeah, the book.
You said you had a poem you wanted to read.
From the book, but it came to me because I was writing a letter to my 16-year-old son, grandson this afternoon. So
which one was it then?
It is 258.
In part 3, right?
Yeah, it must be part 3. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Huh? Yeah, go ahead and read it for us.
Because my second oldest grandson is turning 16 tomorrow, and I always write letters to the birthday letters. And this year I was trying, and he's in the middle, of course, he's a sophomore, and he's getting ready to think about college, but he's also mourning his grandfather. So I was writing him a letter that would talk about looking backward and looking forward. So then I came upon this poem today.
Yeah.
It's very appropriate. Okay. I see that people in the world are born and then they die. Those who were 16 just yesterday morning with vigorous spirits and hearts are now past 70. With waning strength and haggard look. We're just like flowers on a spring day that open in the morning and in the evening decline.
I can't believe he wrote that to you so long ago.
It was perfect.
How old was Michael?
He was only 68.
68, didn't quite reach 70.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
But my grandson's grandma has. So.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for pointing that out. It's so perfect.
Thank you.
It's interesting when they come as such a gift like that, huh?
Yeah.
And when I was reading your poem, I went to number 220. So take a look at that.
Okay.
All of you. Number 220. Naturally, I long for a way-seeking companion. Companions of the way often become very close. At times, I meet someone who penetrates the source. Whenever I speak with a Zen practitioner, we discuss profound matters on the moonlit light, searching for reality until daybreak. By letting go of all traces, you'll surely know the original person. And it's interesting in your poem how all these parts really sought each other out. They opened in a clearing, they came to each other.
Right. And it was in response to the question of what if there was nothing wrong with me?
Yeah.
It was pulling the pieces together.
Yeah.
And walking and walking. So.
Yeah. And by letting go of the things that were the barriers, they began to know the original person, which actually isn't isn't any one of them.
Right.
It's the way they all come together.
Right.
Another of our friends in the UK, a friend David, wrote in response to the question about vow. He said, it's turned out that the vow is to share the Dharma. This, when all is said and done, is as selfish as it is altruistic. I love that. It's like you have to do it. You can't not do it. And yet, Dogen, translated, said that to study the self is to lose or forget the self. And the Shin Shin Ming, it says, the enlightened of all times and places have entered into this truth. In it, there's no gain, no loss. He goes on, from my first Zen retreat, I knew that Sangha was key in a way that I hadn't really realized before. Like all realizations, it now seems impossible to know how I didn't know this before. I had not sussed this in any of my earlier retreats and encounters with Buddhism. The foundations of Sangha are dug in Dharma. A great line. He was realizing that it's only through these relationships that we actually open to what's true. He goes on later, the question that cannot be begged concerns what Dharma is. My experience proposes that this question can only be answered in the crucible of connection with others, through the mirror of engagement, in the light of lives being lived, and in a context which comprehends practice. Engagement with the Dharma is not a matter of academic or scholarly study. And by the way, this was written by a guy who wrote a whole book on philosophical things, very philosophical things. It was academic. Nor is it about disciplined, perfect practice. It's something we live by and are lived to live by and be lived by, or so it seems to me. Dharma is surely as much mud as it is lotus. For me, a major challenge in sharing or embracing the Dharma lies in translation. Translation across time, language, cultures, physics. All teachers are faced with this challenge. To translate is to commit to an interpretation. Ironically, then to subscribe to a form of dualism. From a beginner's mind, the translator slips too easily into expertise and authority. And he goes on and gives some pretty colorful commentary, if you've read it, on translation. But, you know, Kaz and Peter are translators. And what they're doing is giving their best go at something because the Dharma needs to be offered, not because it's true or right or perfect. Nothing is ever that.
What were you just reading from?
I was just reading from one of the students' comments.
Flint, can you say something about by letting the line from the poem 220, by letting go of all traces?
Uh-huh. It's a similar thing to body and mind dropping away. Self, forgetting the self. There's also sometimes in some Zen literature an expression of letting go of all traces of doubt. And it doesn't mean, I think, that we lose our doubt, it's that we don't let it be a hindrance.
Okay.
Another way to think about it is softening the habits of conditioning so we open to a nirvanic moment.
That's where I was going.
Yeah, I think that's its ultimate expression.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. See, there's one other thing from David I wanted to read just briefly. He talks about the Dharma being unsurpassable, not because it is the best, but because it is good as many others and works just fine for some people I know. In reality, we all share Dharma, though some of us seem compelled to share it and teach it more than others. This is where I find myself vowing explicitly to share it. This vow is a kind of insurance policy, but one that can only pay out if it pays out for everyone. Sometimes I wonder if this is improper. I don't think there is any being alone on Coal Mountain. Certainly it isn't. And Hanshan speaks about the same mess that we get into. And by the way, I think the more technical term that David used in his piece, if you read it, he didn't really call it a mess. I think he called it a shit show. How it actually does. But look at number 171. And he wasn't even talking about politics. Number 171. This was an interesting one for me because there were enormous sandalwood forests on the island of Molokai 2 centuries ago. But mostly there was such a huge market for it in China that they came and made the sandalwood pretty much extinct on the island. It's all gone. And right now, new sandalwood trees and also box cedar, like cigar box cedar, are being planted at the Hui to see if they might be revived and actually start a new forest. Number 171, someone grabbed hold of a plain sandalwood tree and called it white sandalwood, which is like a really fancy one. Students of the way are as many as grains of sand, yet how many of them attain nirvana? They put down gold to pick up weeds, though blinding others blinds the self. Like mounding sand in one place to make a ball. It's a mess. We grab hold of ordinary experiences, trying to make it into something. And the gold is right here in our hands, and we put it down and pick up weeds. If we're not clear, we'll distract other people because we're distracted, and it's like trying to make a ball out of a bunch of sand. It doesn't hold together. I just loved this poem because it spoke to how without each other, without companions along the way, without the teachings of the Dharma, without a teacher, our practice becomes self-centered and small and unfocused. Partly because we want it to be something that it's not, something permanent. You know, the most frequently quoted passage from the Diamond Sutra is this short verse. Some of you probably even know it. I bet Kim knows it. So you should view this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom in a dream. It's speaking about interdependence and impermanence in a poetic way. So you should view this fleeting world. This is how you should view this impermanent world. Like a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, like a flickering lamp, a phantom in a dream. We work hard to make things solid and understandable and permanent. And most of all, mine. In the process, we make a mess, like Hanshan was just saying. And as our companion David described, it's like a 182. Number 182. People think the body is our foundation with the mind in charge. If your mind is at its source, it won't be crooked. If your mind is crooked, the source of life is lost. There is no escaping disaster. There is no escaping disaster. How can you say you're too lazy to reflect in the mirror? If you don't keep the Diamond Sutra in mind, you make bodhisattvas sick. We could have a whole seminar on this poem. There's a lot in there, don't you think? What jumps out at you? Somebody tell you, like, what jumps out at you?
Well, I just like the line that says, how can you say you're too lazy to reflect in the mirror? I love that image.
But we do all the time, don't we? Judith?
What jumps out at me is the very center of it. There's no escaping this disaster.
That's right. That's right. You're in for the whole thing. Kath?
That was mine too.
That was yours too, yeah. Mm-hmm. I like the, people think the body is our foundation, the mind's in charge. It's like our brain is dragging us away and our body is the thing. Oh, I was just about to ruin us by not being plugged in. There we go, sorry. If you don't keep the Diamond Sutra in mind, you make bodhisattvas sick. So he's speaking about this thing I was talking about. Here's a Red Pine, some of you know, is a translator of these sutras. And this is a less poetic version of those last lines. It's more literal. And I think some of you that heard Peter Levitt talk about their process, or no, it was Norman Fisher talking about translating. He said Kaz would give them the literal translation of the symbols, and it was sort of like unintelligible. And then they would have to fashion it into something that was, well, here's a more literal translation of that poetic thing I just read. As a lamp, a cataract, a star in space, an illusion, a dewdrop, a bubble, a dream, a cloud, a flash of lightning, view all created things like this. In some ways, it's pretty clear. So if you don't keep that in mind, you don't keep the Diamond Sutra in mind, you make bodhisattvas sick. In other words, I was thinking if you, this one is important for me because I have to function in this role as a teacher. So if I delude people, if I give you the idea that I have an answer or something solid or the truth or the way that's going to solve all your problems, then I'm actually making your natural state as a bodhisattva sick. So if you lose your way, the bodhisattva vow not only doesn't help, it makes you others sick. Because the source of life is inconceivable, but it can be lived. And the source is incomprehensible, yet it can be realized. And we help each other by being the best imperfect mirrors we can be, by simply being ourselves. It's just, heaven, please save us from helping. Let's look at number 159. And we're going to continue with the Diamond Sutra here. 159. You who greedily seek pleasure, that would be all of us. You who greedily seek pleasure don't realize the calamity of your 100 years. That's a good one to refer back to. There's no escaping disaster, right? What you see is just a mirage or bubbles in water. Soon you will know the body's impermanence and decay. If your aspiration is as strong as iron, your heart of the way is genuine. That's back to Appamada. Just practice intimately, like frost gathering beneath bamboo. Then you'll know how to bend your spirit. I love that image. Practice intimately, like frost gathering beneath bamboo. Then you'll know how to bend your spirit. You're going to say something, Eileen? Oh, you were mouthing something, but it didn't matter. Some of you who listen to
I was just,
Yes, Anne.
I
Stop
was
me.
just wondering, it's, yeah, it's like, you'll know how to not bend your spirit.
I'm gonna
Or-
comment on that.
Oh, okay.
Did you have a particular question about it, or just wondered what that was?
Not.
Okay. I was just recently listening to a Dharma talk by Frank Ostasteki, it's in the Everyday Zen series on The World Could Be Otherwise. Some of you may have heard it, I don't know. But you're probably familiar with him. He wrote the 5 Invitations, discovering what death can teach us about living fully. And he was one of the people that helped form and maintain the Zen Hospice in San Francisco. And this summer, Frank had a series of very serious strokes himself. And he's still recovering. His strokes did not affect his speech center, but affected quite a number of other things. And I'll post the 5 invitations so you'll know what they are. It's welcome everything, push away nothing, bring your whole self to the experience, don't wait, find a place of rest in the middle of things, cultivate don't know mind. They're foundations for practice. And I'll give you the link to the talk. It's a really good one. But when I read the last line, the one that Anne's asking about, just practice intimately like frost gathering beneath bamboo, then you'll know how to bend your spirit. I thought of a line from Frank's talk, because he said, I'm doing what the medical people ask me to do, but I'm not really focused on recovery. I'm focused on discovery. And that stopped me in my tracks. Of course, he's going to do what the doctors say. You know, it's not that he doesn't want to get well, but that's not his focus. What can I learn from this? And it just felt like a real powerful inspiration to me. As natural, this intimate practice, as natural as frost gathering beneath, then you'll know how to bend your spirit. Then you'll know how to, shape your life with what's coming. Does that help, Anne? Yeah. So there's a whole bunch more in this second section. But one of the last things I wanted to do is this last half hour is spend some time on what I call taking a long view. You know, we live in a culture that valorizes instant results. You know, if your Google search takes more than 2 seconds, you're like, what's the deal? And you want things to happen really fast. And also, we view things within very short-term perspectives. Unfortunately, our financial systems and political systems do the same thing, very short-term. So as a secondary reference, if you're curious, this is not something you have to get, but this book called Long View, it's a book of images and poetry and practices by a couple of people. Here's what the creators, the man and wife, say about this project. The Long View combines exploration and art to celebrate the value and beauty of trees and the importance of the natural environment and our connection with it. Have I ever shared this with you, Cassie? Because one of them is a photographer and the other is a writer. You'll see. We have spent 2 years with 7 remarkably ordinary trees in Cumbria. That's like in the Lake District in England. Walking, camping, leading public walks, working with the schools, strolling with ecologists. These trees, 7 trees, a hawthorn, a rowan, an elder, a Scots pine, a sycamore, a birch, and an oak, have become beacons in a wide and varied landscape. They are ordinary trees representing all trees in the UK. And I wrote to myself at the end of this is nature as Buddha, ordinary, everyday life unfolding as Dharma, and walking together as Sangha. If these people were, they essentially put themselves in a 2-year practice period. And here's the description of their practice period by someone else, because they're reflecting on it. This elegant and open-ended project takes as its starting point a deceptively simple concept. Listen to how dharmic this is. 7 lone trees. I mean, I could see Kim drawing the pictures of each of these and writing the poem for them. 7 lone trees in disparate locations, standing initially for nothing very much and nowhere in particular, but eventually interconnecting with everyone and everything and everywhere. A skillfully self-curated journey through poetry, research, community engagement, printmaking, storytelling, expeditions, place philosophy, imagery, meditation, and environmental concerns. And that little piece of poetry that I sent in the email was from this project. It takes a while to walk in, to walk into a valley, to walk into a feeling of being at ease with yourself, with the land. And while walking in, there's a walking out of concerns and out of bodily strain, a loosening of spine, legs, shoulders, and head, a slow unraveling into openness that brings with time the sense of walking in, walking into place. I thought it was just beautiful. And it's so like Hanshan, echoing some of these same things. If you, there's a whole chapter on each of the trees. There's one of them. That was the little Aspie hawthorn. And they have pictures of them, of course, at different times of the year. Here's the pine. And people walk and they take pictures. But here's something that I got from Glenn today. And I asked his permission if I could read it. He can certainly comment on it further if he'd like. He was just reintroducing himself. We had met lunch just casually and unexpectedly at in a Dharma event called Eating Dinner at Hyde Park Bar and Grill at the bar, and realized we had something in common, which was Appamada. But anyway, he wrote to me, he said, "It's hard to express how relevant these poems are for me. My parents both died recently, and I've inherited our 4th generation family site on the South Llano River near Junction, Texas. And some of us know that area and how beautiful it is. Born and raised, father and grandfather before me. The site sits on a clear river above a creek and beneath a limestone bluff. I've just completed a cabin there to complement the main house. My daughter and I have renamed the site Cupgrass after a native plant in the area." And then he speaks a little more about some things, but he says, "The pull of grief and the healing of solitude are intense for me right now." And then after a bit, he says, "And yet the core of my practice is learning to engage fully in the society around me. There's this pull for solitude, and yet the practice is the pull of engagement. I'm an activist, a housing lobbyist, very immersed in efforts here in Austin and in the national movement to fight rising housing and transportation costs. My daughter's just graduated from college, joined me. So the desire is not to disengage. It's the conflict more fully engaging, to fully engage both, the city or the river, the solitude or the politics. A horribly privileged question in some way, cringeworthy maybe, but I'm really torn between these two illusory poles," and he calls them illusory. You want to say anything else about that, Glenn? No? Is that okay? Did I capture it okay? Yeah, we see just exactly what Hanshan's talking about here. In fact, look at 147. And I love the imagery that you put in there, Glenn. Certainly I was touched by the heartfelt expression of what's going on. But that imagery is so much out of my own youth in that landscape. All you have to say is a limestone cliff and things like, oh, I'm right there. And some of you who grew up in Central Texas, the Penelope is right near the springs in New Braunfels. And much of her work is around the water and the limestone, and that landscape. Number 147. This tree was growing before the forest was born. If you guess its age, it's twice as old. Its roots met the changes of hills and ravines. Its leaves were altered by wind and frost. Everyone laughs at its outer decay, failing to appreciate the colorful patterns within. Its bark may have peeled away, but there's only truth inside. Of course, it can be about trees, but it's about a lot more, right? The tree was growing before the forest was born. It echoed for me that old koan about show me your face before your parents were born. That if the tree was growing before the forest was born, wait a minute. If you guess its age, it's twice as old. He's pointing to something outside of time, not captured in linear time. Its roots met the changes of hills and ravines. Its leaves were altered by wind and frost. It may be the absolute, it may be talking about the inconceivable, but we only know it because it's shaped by everyday embodied life, just like our bodies are. Everyone laughs at its outer decay. I thought that was interesting. It's talking about impermanence, but laughing at it. But how often do we laugh with the discomfort of having to face? Yeah, go ahead.
147.
Yeah.
It's almost a perfect description of a fractal as well.
Yes, isn't it? Say more.
Not sure I can.
Oh, okay.
That idea of unfolding out of emptiness with an inherent algorithm or truth, and then
yes.
it manifests as it weaves down into time.
That's right. So, and even one thing is the whole.
If you map those hills and ravines on a topography map, you'd see the same linear fractal that you would see in a tree branch or your hand or your family.
Yes, there it is.
Kind of like that one.
And if its bark may have been peeled away, as we open up to see what's inside, there's only truth manifesting in all of these different ways. It's a fantastic poem about form and emptiness. In the long view, the authors say this. They say, in selecting trees that stand alone, we're not celebrating isolated trees above, woodlands, but their isolation makes them strong photographic subjects. It also adds to their magnetism. Walking to a tree that stands alone and can be seen from a distance strengthens its draw and emphasizes its importance. Although many trees do stand alone, and some of these loners become ancients, scientific findings suggest that trees prefer to be in company. They communicate with one another, and in groups provide richer habitats and stopping points for birds and other species. While walking and spending quiet time with the trees, it's fundamental to our practice. Being with others is also essential. We like company too. This being pulled to the city or to the land, to this or to that, just like the trees. I also thought that, go ahead, Cass.
When I took my trip up to the Redwood Forest, one of the things that they taught me was that when redwoods get old, their roots grow together, and they use that as a support to keep growing taller.
Yeah, support each other. They're good spiritual friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That reminds me, now I'll have to add another poem. Mark Nepo's poem, In Muir Woods. It's quite beautiful. And of course, there's Mary Oliver's When I'm Among the Trees. Number 149. I usually live in a quiet, secluded place. But there are times I go to Joaquin Monastery to drop in on Sengen, his buddy, or pay a visit to Shide, his sidekick. Then I return to my wintry cave where there is no one to talk to. When I look for a limitless source of water, the source may be limited, but the water's not. I live in this quiet place, but I got to reach out to my buddies. When I look for a limitless anything, I realize everything is limited, but the water, the truth, the Dharma, not limited. If you read further in the section on the long view, it talks about how they went through, rain and sub-zero, all these different things. They didn't shy away from the different elements because something else could be shown to them. And if you look at 151, my original home is on Tiantai. The way is cloudy, the mist deep, cutting off visitors. And by the way, if you've ever been in the Lake District at certain times of the year, it's like that. This morning, the ridge above us over here, the clouds started tumbling over down into the valley, reminded us. The way is cloudy, the mist deep, cutting off visitors. 1,000 Ren mountain range is the right place to retreat. My stone lookout above countless layers of valleys and streams. Wearing a birch bark hat and wooden sandals, I stroll beside rivers. In leather and cloth robe, holding a bramble stick, I circle the mountain. I realize this floating life is a constantly changing illusion, but joyous rambling is just so good. It sounds kind of high and spiritual in the beginning, but at the end, it's like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's good just to bumble along and enjoy our life walking together. In the long view, the authors say, it's through entering and dwelling in these less visited spaces that something new and deeper can arise. Intense physical sensations, moments of serenity and peace, novel ways of seeing, fresh ideas and challenging conversations, and a deeper connection with place. I thought that altogether, that was a beautiful description of what it's like to walk together with Hanshan and walk with each other in practice and just be together, even meet together like this. Entering and dwelling in these less visited spaces, something new and deeper can arise. Number 207. I've been reading a lot. Hey, Kim, you want to read something? Read 207, Kim? I haven't heard your voice today. 207. And remember, you have a soft voice. So.
I keep thinking of things, but too late.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go, number 207.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I enjoy an ordinary way of living amongst
You don't have a soft voice.
pines and rocky caves, where the feeling of the wild moves freely through the vastness. For a long time, I have accompanied the white cloud. There is a path, but it does not go through to worldly realms. With no mind, what is there to climb? I spend the night sitting alone on the stone floor, while the full moon rises over Cold Mountain.
I ask you to read that because for some reason when I read it, it reminded me of your head student ceremony. I don't know why, but there's something about that. Does anything in that poem resonate for you?
Let me read it again because it's always hard to take it in if I have to read it aloud.
I'll read it to you.
Oh, good.
Or we'll have, we'll have somebody else read. Somebody else want to read? Eileen, you want to read? I haven't heard your voice. You can read from across town.
Okay. I enjoy an ordinary way of living amongst mist, vines, and rocky caves, where the feeling of the wild moves freely through the vastness. For a long time, I've accompanied the white cloud. There is a path, but it does not go through to worldly realms. With no mind, what is there to climb? I spend a night sitting alone on the stone floor while the full moon rises over Cold Mountain.
Anything jump out at you, Eileen? Just a line, a word, anything.
With no mind, what is there to climb?
Mm-hmm. That's actually what I thought of, Kim, from your ceremony.
Yeah, that's the line that also stood out to me. And I think the experience of the ceremony was one of not thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that I posted my homework last night. So
Oh.
I don't know.
Oh, I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the thoughts I had was like a realization that isn't a thought.
That what?
That a realization that is not a thought.
Yeah, not a thought. Yep.
And that that deep acceptance of oneself.
Yeah, that doesn't come as a thought.
Right, and I haven't had that many. I've had some experiences of it, of that sensation or of that realization, and the ceremony was definitely one of those.
Yeah. That's why earlier I was writing to myself, I said that the source of life is inconceivable, yet it can be lived. And the source is incomprehensible, but it can be realized. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that caught me was the next line, I spend the night sitting alone on the stone floor, because I will just say I did not sleep the night before that.
Yes.
And I sat. And
Well, you know, the other one, and this is a less joyful image of it, that also to me could represent what it's like to be in grief. Feel like you're sitting alone in something kind of cold and hard. Not in your ceremony, but just you've experienced that some. Yeah. While the full moon rises, it's still, everything keeps moving, keeps going. But look at 197. Above Cold Mountain's peak, the moon's lone disk illuminates the clear sky. Nothing else appears. Honor this priceless natural treasure hidden in the 5 skandhas of your drowning body. Is that a great line? Honor the priceless natural treasure hidden in the heaps that make up your impermanent body. It's not somewhere else, it's here.
Can I say something?
Please.
So what's been coming up for me as you've been reading these poems is right after we had our retreat, I went to the Racial Justice Summit here in Madison, which I go to every year and I love.
Oh, yeah.
I did a workshop. And so, you know, you're surrounded with all of these people who are engaged in the racial justice movement, and these are very, very thoughtful, justice-oriented people. Well, I did a workshop that was ultimately about whiteness and sort of the embodied experience of how oppression sort of physically lives in you. It was a very powerful day. But the thing that struck me over and over again was we were paired, and we actually did a lot of exercises that reminded me of our practice, right, of our relational work. But primarily our job was to just feel our bodies as we were experiencing various things. Every single person I was paired with couldn't feel their body.
Mm.
Every single person. And there's probably 7 different people in this group of maybe 6
Yeah.
I was with. And it was like, it was stunning to me. It was, it was this really stunning. And
every single person would.
Couldn't feel the body.
That's what I thought she said.
Yeah. It's so, we're so disembodied and so unaccustomed to living in our body and feeling our bodies and being embodied, and yet that's our primary truth.
right. And
Yeah.
and I feel like these the poems just keep bringing the Dharma and the teachings back into the body.
Yes.
Not up here. Not up
Right.
here. And we are so up here. I am so up here.
Cassie?
What was the line? Every single person what?
Oh, I don't know if I'm really talking loud. I'm sorry for me. But every single person could not feel their body. As
They
we-
couldn't feel their body. They're not connected to body.
Right. So, and that was the practice, was to intentionally feel the physical sensations and be aware of what was happening in your body as we were doing, you know, like we watched a nature video, for instance. And
Yeah. Well, you know, we're at the end of our time, and we're going to have to stop here. I want to look at one last poem, which just underscores where we're ending here, and it's number 219. And once again, the imagery is physical. Number 219. Sitting here on a flat stone, the valley stream is bitter cold. Quietly, I appreciate its utter beauty. An empty cave lost in the mist. At this place, where I rest in joy, the slanted sun makes the long shadows of the trees. When I observe my mind ground, a lotus comes out of the muddy water. When I observe my mind ground, what is the mind ground?
It's like the ground of being.
Yeah, and I think you can imagine it as the body. When I observe my mind ground, then a lotus comes out of the muddy water.
There's also where Buddha touches the ground when they ask him, you know, where did you get this from?
That's right. And who are you to wake up? And he says, the world is my witness. Yes, mind ground.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for your participation tonight, for showing up, and everyone that we heard from and everyone we didn't. Tess and some other folks, but thank you very much for being part of things. And I'll post the recording, since it was recorded, and a few other poems. And do take a look at the homework. People are writing and sharing and making pictures and drawing beautiful things.
So I enjoyed yours.
So good afternoon or good night or whatever you are, wherever you are. This is Calabash.
Thank you, Flint.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.